Hello, and welcome to the ECR Retail Loss, Sell More and Lose Less podcast series. My name is Colin Peacock. I work with a community of experts and academics who are keen to share their latest research findings and best practices. And every week or two in this series, I'll be joined by one of those experts and academics to discuss some of the very latest insights from our meetings and discussions and research on best practices. In this week's episode, I'm joined by Professor Beck, and we look at the problem of losses on the fresh meat category. This has seen a substantial increase in losses over the last couple of years, and we're exploring the different ways that retailers are tackling this problem. Well, look, last week we had a couple of sessions, but one of them was on let's call it protein or fresh meat, but it was around the sort of losses. It was suggested as a session by one of our Australian friends, and it got enormous interest actually. We had a lot of retailers on the call, and we don't normally do these sort of deep dives onto a product, especially sort of when the nature of the losses might be more malicious than non-malicious. Nevertheless, we had a great discussion. I think 10 or so retailers shared updates on what they're doing. So really good sharing session, both in terms of numbers and that they were recording, which helped with benchmarking, but also the practices that they were looking at now and in the future. So with all that said, what did you write down in that sort of scholarly book of notes around shrinkage meetings that you've got there?
Yes, it was a good session, I thought, because I think one of the things that was interesting was just the volume of retailers who wanted to share about this. It's clearly a pressing concern for a lot of grocers, I think. And, in the past, I don't think we've really considered meat to be a hot product. We've traditionally focused upon beers, wines and spirits, perhaps, yes, or health and beauty, classics, nappies and so on. And meat hasn't often come to the top of the list. And so it was really interesting to, first of all, hear just about some of the numbers that retailers were prepared to share on how much they were losing. And some of them were really quite dramatic, weren't they? Sort of not quite double digit, but getting close to double digit and accounting for perhaps as much as a third of all their losses in their store.
I know, it's incredible. The sign of the times, perhaps, but very interesting level of losses.
So that was an interesting part, just getting a sense of the scale of this. But the thing that struck me was, that all the retailers who participated, the amount of energy that they're putting in to try and protect these products now. There's clearly a lot of work being going on to, and most of it was very much traditional sort of target hardening approaches, wasn't it? And we've sort of gone through this phase of where stores have been opened up. We've been trying to reduce the amount of friction, and of course self-checkout has been part of that, because self-checkout needs to be as little friction as you possibly can, because you're expecting the customer to do all the work, and so you don't want to make it too complicated. And what we saw here was lots of retailers putting layers of friction back in to try and protect these products. So lots of sort of tagging strategies, people talking about using safer cases on meat, which traditionally we haven't really seen. And so there was this lots of sort of effort being put in to try and protect them. But I like some of the other things that people talked about as well, taking slightly more progressive approach around thinking about the ranging of these in certain stores. Do we want these products in all our stores? Trying to limit the amount of stock on shelf availability, so little and often, to try and limit the damage that might be coming through that. But also, it's interesting to hear about trying to understand some of the non-theft related issues associated with meat around weight, and how the system manages a product that can vary a lot in weight, and how you can make sure that you're not corrupting your shrink data just simply because of process issues. So it was really interesting listening to these retailers really putting a lot of energy into trying to protect what is clearly a vulnerable brand for some of them.
Well, yeah, just picking up on, I think one of the other things we heard was about location and, the power of the benefit of moving to a more high traffic, high visibility location in the store. And that was working well for one retailer. It seems obvious, but, you can't ever put everything at the front of the store, but certainly putting the items that are causing such enormous levels of loss into a more visible location seems to be working and seems to make sense. But we did hear a bit of a conundrum around the sort of EAS and the soft tagging, around the sort of retailers who've got a lot of mobile scan and go operations. Some of the retailers in the room would have had 15 or 12% or something of their total transactions going through a sort of handheld device. And that seemed to be quite a problem too. I'm not sure how the sort of you can square that circle, but what were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we've spoken about this before, haven't we? One of the great challenges with tagging technologies is that it doesn't sit well with self-checkout, because somehow you want the tag to be deactivated as easily as you can, but you don't want to make that deactivation too easy, because then it's losing its purpose in terms of protecting the product. And so, we've seen lots of retailers who are struggling to try and find ways to make sure that tags are deactivated properly, so you don't get lots of tag pollution leaving the stores or setting the alarms off, and all the problems we've seen with that. And it becomes particularly acute, doesn't it, when you're using hard tags as well, or safer cases, where really the only way is you've either got to get a member of staff involved to get that the defensive product off it, or you've got to allow the consumer to do that, and that's quite tricky technology, because you've got to, we've seen this with hard tags and pins, for instance, where when you start letting customers take these things apart, you suddenly think, oh my goodness, is anybody going to get hurt around this, or health and safety issues. So, we heard a lot of retailers who were bringing in tagging because they were concerned about the numbers, but they were seeing a real jarring with their self-checkout systems and how they're going to try and make those work. And so for some of them, it didn't feel good. The idea that you're going to have to wait till the consumer sets the alarm off to get a member of staff to come and deactivate the tag didn't feel right. And and it comes back also to the conversation we had around mobile scan and go, where they were accounting for less than 1% of transactions. Do you want this system in there? Because it compromises, your systems in lots of other ways. You're suddenly having to say, do we have to take tags off to make mobile scan work? And you go, well, nobody's really using mobile scan, so do we really want to do that? So yes. there's lots of issues around this, and I think, and people were talking a lot about tagging because it is one of the most traditional and established ways to try and protect.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. So. I think it is one of the conundrums with self-checkout is that we need the manufacturers and developers of tagging systems to really begin to think through how their product properly interacts with self-checkout. How can they be SCO compliant, as it were, with their product to make sure that retailers aren't struggling with this, with having to choose between self-checkout and tagging. How can we begin to bring them together? And I know some suppliers are certainly thinking this through now and developing new products to enable this to happen.
Yeah, we shall see that. Well, look, I spoke to a few people after, some of the retailers afterwards. They wanted to anniversary this meeting. So, I think we'll see where we got to, this time next year. See whether these issues and these new suppliers of EAS, as you say, come through, see what progress has been made. With some of the other retailers and some of the interventions and some of the tracking through the supply chain that some people mentioned. So it should be really interesting. But thank you so much for sharing your notes. We shall revisit this in a year's time. And thank you again. Bye-bye.
Cheers, Colin. Bye-bye.
Well, that's all we have time for this week. Thank you for joining us. And thanks to all the ECR retail loss community for the sharing of their knowledge, their research and latest learnings that ensure that we become truly a global platform for learning. My name is Colin Peacock. This is the Sell More and Lose Less podcast. And if you liked it, please subscribe so you automatically get all future episodes. And also, if you think your colleagues and friends might also like it, please ask them to follow ECR Retail Loss on LinkedIn and tune in to our next podcasts. If you didn't like it, then let us know and we'll try and fix it. Either way, see you next time. Thank you again.